Good afternoon. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will today present his supplementary budget as the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic continues to intensify. Economists say the budget is likely to show an economy in depression, with falling GDP numbers and expected debt of 100% of GDP expected in 2024. South Africa is facing its worst jobs bloodbath in a decade, escalating debt and an expected shortfall in tax collection of more than 300 billion rand. The country is also likely to borrow more from international financial institutions. Let's continue looking ahead at this afternoon's emergency budget to be tabled by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. I'm now joined via Skype by Deborah Tickle, who's a tax practitioner at Tickleon Tax. Deborah, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. What are you looking for in the supplementary budget later on?
Good afternoon, and how are you?
Well, thank you.
This afternoon, I'm hoping for a stimulatory budget because I think it's very difficult for our minister with the amount of debt that is currently in place, and also the fact that in February he had a very, very different picture than what he has now. What we see is significant amounts of debt plus the 500 billion that's been offered for the COVID-19 assistance. And what we're looking at is some of that amount being filled by what he says is amounts from the February budget. Now, unfortunately, the amounts that are short from the February budget are around about 300 billion rand. And that leaves us in a situation where not only are we looking for the 130 billion from the 500 billion that is looking for from the tax budget, but we're looking for the shortfall as well, which is quite a considerable amount. So we're looking at what is he going to do? He's going to have to make sure that costs are controlled, and he talks about a zero-based budget, and then he's going to look to taxpayers for some more money. But how much can he actually take? My feeling is that if you look at the rest of the world, we're probably in for a COVID-19 levy. We saw something like this in 1994. And the sort of thing that would represent would be, for example, on high income earners, say an extra 5%. So people who are earning more than 500,000 Rand per annum might get an extra 5% tax on their current earnings, the people who haven't suffered as much as those who've lost their jobs, for example. And that could amount to about 10 million, but it doesn't go anywhere near filling the budget or the whole.
Yeah, there have been discussions about a possible wealth tax. There's also been questions about whether we're going to see that corporate tax increasing from around 28% where it is now. But there's also a sense that people already feel overtaxed in South Africa. So what are the other options that perhaps could be looked at?
Okay, you're quite right. I mean, our corporate tax is already very high in relation to the rest of the world. If we look at Europe and even the US, they're down to, the UK, for example, 19%. So we're competing for monies with countries which have got much lower tax rates and much easier tax scenarios than we have. So I don't really see the tax rates for corporates going up. What the minister might do is extend what he said in February about the brought forward losses. He said then that when corporates have brought forward losses, they will, if they make a profit, still have to pay tax on 20% of their profit. He may increase that to say 50 or some more over the COVID period. You mentioned people's unwillingness to pay tax, and we have a serious problem with tax morality because there is a trust gap between taxpayers and government. We're seeing a much better revenue authority under the new Commissioner Kieswetter, and I think that people would be unwise to try not to pay taxes that they owe, but obviously people pay it grudgingly. However, the sort of taxes that people do pay willingly are taxes on alcohol and cigarettes. So we've seen a bit of a gap because people haven't been able to buy those things. When that comes back online, we've got the alcohol back online already. If they put the taxes up, we see that people still buy them. So there is a little bit of an opportunity there. Possibly an increased road fund levy. Unlikely, because that was increased in February. So I doubt that. But it's going to be very, very difficult for him to raise taxes.
And then when it comes to the different kind of taxes that there are, we know there were new expat tax laws that came in March, and it's almost like a trying to scrimp and save as much as possible when it comes to taxes in order to help the country. This isn't going to assist us because we are facing a monumental crisis, as is the whole world. What kind of thinking should there be then around taxes in South Africa and how they can help mitigate the impact of COVID-19?
Okay, that's a big question, and I didn't mention, you mentioned wealth tax just now, and I didn't really talk about wealth tax. And there's been a lot in the media about wealth taxes, and unfortunately, the Davis Tax Committee, which I happen to sit on, has done a lot of work on wealth taxes, and we've worked with the South African Revenue Service on looking at what could be done with wealth taxes going forward. And at this point in time, there just isn't the capacity within SARS to levy any further wealth taxes, remembering that we already have estate duty and donations tax, as well as securities transfer taxes, which are all wealth taxes. So to introduce new wealth taxes is not practical right now and would cost more than what would be collected. What could be contemplated is an increase in existing wealth taxes, like estate duty, for example. But we have to remember that whilst our estate duty is 20% and 25%, depending on what level you're at, there is still capital gains tax when a person dies. So where we look at the UK and the States, for example, where they have 40% estate duty, they don't have that capital gains tax. So we would have to remove the capital gains tax to add the additional estate duty. And how much additional amount that would add is questionable. But yes, obviously going forward long term, that is something that will be investigated further. My concern about that, though, is that our wealthy people are diminishing. We've seen them leaving. We're seeing their wealth being diminished naturally through losses in markets, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to have a situation in this country where we're growing the country, we're providing employment, we're not disincentivizing people from actually generating wealth. So one of the things I would hope is that our minister is doing something that stimulates people's desire to create employment.
Deborah Tickle, who's a tax practitioner at Tickleon Tax, thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon, discussing what may come up and the factors that should be thought about when it comes to our budget going forward.